Here we are visiting today again with Charlene Notgrass. Welcome again, Charlene. It's so nice to just get to visit with you.
It's been wonderful.
Oh, it's just been so much fun, and we've learned a lot. So now we want to take the opportunity to help our homeschool parents.
Okay.
And we want to focus on the topic of homeschooling from burden to lifestyle. And it's a topic I know you're familiar with. So what was your first exposure to homeschooling?
My first exposure was on television. Now, I will say our minister and his family had homeschooled for a year in Africa, in Cameroon. And I'd heard about that, but I'd never heard of Americans homeschooling, just regular people living lives in America. So I was watching the Phil Donahue show, but don't tell anybody, one morning when my children were little, our children, and Dr. Raymond Moore was on. And I heard about this amazing idea, and I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. I sent off for his newsletter. I talked to Ray, who had thought I'd lost my mind. And I talked to our minister's wife.
Okay.
And she said, John needs to be with other children. So that was my first introduction to homeschooling.
So then how did you make the decision for you personally to be able to homeschool?
Right. Well, of course, I had to convince Ray, but it was actually circumstances that convinced us both. John went to a year of Christian kindergarten because we were living in Mississippi and there wasn't public kindergarten yet then. And then we moved here to Illinois, to Urbana, and enrolled our children in the local public school. And things just began to not be the way we wanted them to be. Our youngest in kindergarten ended up in a class with, I guess we'd call him a bully now. He spit glue in her face. One day he kissed her on the lips. And Mary Evelyn came home and said, a little boy kissed me on the lips. And I said, Mary Evelyn, why didn't you move? And she said, I would have to get out of line. And she was a very obedient student, and that would not occur to her to disobey her teacher, even in that kind of circumstance. So I went to the teacher, and we both gave Mary Evelyn permission to disobey the rules if she was in an uncomfortable situation. And then just was kind of one thing after another. And at the same time, we were listening to James Dobson on the radio, and we were listening to other speakers on Christian radio, and both of us, Ray and I, our wheels got to turning, and we, being organized people who always plan things way in advance, decided in August that we would start homeschooling in the fall of 1990.
Oh, so no last minute decision there,
No,
right?
not us. Not us, yeah.
Okay, so now Ray's on board and you've made the decision. What was your experience getting started?
Well, at first, it was really difficult. I did the typical put up a bulletin board, say the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody has their desk in the den. I used a very traditional curriculum that a friend of mine loaned to me. And that was not easy. The next year, we did a very creative unit study. So for the next year, we did that. And I was up till 11 o'clock at night making lesson plans, really wigging out. Ray was a minister. I felt like, we already lived in a fishbowl. And so I just felt like I've got to do this perfectly. After those 2 years, Ray came to me and said, there's got to be an easier way to educate these children than this. And we decided to put our kids in Christian school for a year. But after many times Ray hearing me tell this story, he said, I remember when I said that. You wrapped yourself around a pole in our basement and fell to the floor crying.
Oh.
And that's why he said it. It's like childbirth. I had totally forgotten it. But until he reminded me of that, we just, we had very little support. And not that we really had outright opposition. We were our own worst enemies. Just all these internal expectations.
Sure.
So we did these 2 years of homeschooling. Then we did a year of Christian school. Ray had to get a part-time job to pay for that. I got a part-time job. Really.
So you added extra burden to your family.
We did. Then we moved back home to Tennessee for Ray to serve as a minister there. And the people who recruited us said, we don't have a Christian school in this town because we don't need them because our teachers are Christians. And I just kind of let myself believe what I didn't really believe. I thought, after these 3 very hard years, I thought, can I believe this? That sounds really, really nice.
Too good to be true.
Yeah, and so we did it. This is now our 4th year in this journey, and we did put the kids in public school. And it wasn't 6 weeks until our oldest and our youngest were saying, please, can we come back home? In August, we started homeschooling again, and that is when we adopted a family policy that had always been our heart, but we put it in writing, and we made that very purposeful decision that this is what our homeschooling is about. It wasn't about what anybody else thought. It wasn't about any curriculum that anybody else thought was a good idea. It was about that. And then I made a list of about 20 things that I thought was important for an adult. Be uniquely God's man or woman, know the Bible, serve other people, the math you need to know, understand history, be a good communicator. Purpose, not curriculum, not a list that somebody else had made in education, but raising people to live a life for God. And our first day of homeschooling, we had been on a mission trip to Idaho, and our first day of homeschooling, we were taking off in our minivan from Idaho toward the Pacific Ocean. I think maybe we stopped at a Lewis and Clark museum that day, and I said to my family, look, we're homeschooling. And that it became who we were. Instead of a sack of rocks, we strapped on our back and carried around. The statistic now is that a lot of homeschoolers quit after a year and a half. That happens to be the average. Research shows. And I totally get that because I did it myself. And I have a passion now. I do a blog of encouragement for 5 years, 5 days a week, never missed a day of encouragement for homeschooling moms because I didn't have it. When I quit after that 2 years the first time, one homeschooling mother judged me. Nobody else said anything. Nobody came alongside me and said, could I encourage you? Why don't you try this? Nobody. And so I have a passion. I believe so strongly in homeschooling now. And my husband, Ray, went from, you're nuts, to writing homeschool curriculum. So that's our story. I'm grateful that I really understand.
So if you're talking to homeschool parents right now, how would you encourage them to shed their burden?
I would encourage everybody not to do homeschooling, but to be, I don't know, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be, I don't know if I can use the word, but to be God's people raising children to follow him and to examine everything in that light. I would encourage them not to get too busy, not just to be somebody who transports children from one place to another, but to really be a family. And that was something that was so priceless to us when we finally learned how to do it. We just became so close. We have so many wonderful memories of times with our children, and we learned with them. The girls and I took a quilting class together. The kids and I took art classes together. We made homeschooling life.
It became a family event.
It did.
It wasn't just about an education.
Right. It was. It is. I love to remind moms about how Jesus taught. You know, we hear a lot about Deuteronomy 6 and Deuteronomy 11, where it talks about teaching your children as you walk along the way and as you lie down and as you sit, etc. If you look at Jesus' life with the disciples, that's exactly how he taught them.
Yes.
And so I would encourage parents to really take those Deuteronomy passages to heart and to realize that they are homeschooling 24/7. And that seems like a burden to some. Oh my goodness, I can hardly do 3 hours, and you're telling me I got to do it 24/7. The key is to realize that your children are learning all the time, and that just takes so much pressure off. And I've told so many mamas, the universe is everything. You're not going to cover it. Get over it. And so it is absolutely the truth. Everybody picks and chooses what their children are going to learn. And everybody. And so don't be afraid to make the choices. Choose what's going to be eternally important rather than what's going to be temporarily important.
I think those are great words of advice for any mom. So thank you so much
You're
for sharing
welcome.
this with us, and thank you for sharing with our moms today. I hope this is an encouragement to them.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.